Hi, Thom. Can you please help me understand Stoicism and the pros and cons, the Vedic worldview on Stoicism?
You know, what the word Stoicism has in recent decades devolved in the common parlance, in the common vernacular, into meaning that you just like, are detached and so on and so forth. In fact, Stoicism doesn't mean that. Uh, a proper deep study of Stoicism is in fact very resonant with the Vedic worldview, but as a result, not as a designed decision to be detached. Stoicism, as it's, someone says, oh, very stoic, meaning, oh, they just learned that their, pet turtle died. And, they don't seem to, it was a 23-year-old relationship and they don't seem to be upset in the least. It's very stoic. But that's actually a wrong way of understanding Stoicism. Stoicism was never actually originally meant to be a designed behavior that you decide to be stoic. As with the Vedic worldview, it may be viewed by others that you have rapid pace of adaptation. A change of expectation comes and you can take it in. You're non-reactive. Instead of being reactive, you have a considered response, a reserved response. You don't give necessarily instant reactions. You have a sense of having all the time in the world. And where does that come from? It comes from our practice. When the mind settles into that quiet state every day, one of the advantages of that in Vedic meditation is that chemical substrates that are now irrelevant, left over from previous experiences, accumulated stress basically, is released, believed, dissolved in the physiology. When we don't have that, we have that readiness to fight or flee at any slight stimulus, and the stimulus might be change of expectation. You thought that bus 3D was going to come, but you forgot that it was Sunday and it didn't come. And so then, your body goes into a fight-flight reaction over that. And, somebody else who is more grounded in being has a change of expectation and they're kind of curious what adventure is going to come now. That didn't happen, so that means something else is going to be happening. And there's no good news or bad news. There's just information about what is happening, and there's information about what's no longer happening. And now I'm going to act accordingly with my senses wide open, rather than having a reaction that becomes obsolete very quickly as soon as we've had the change of expectation and we realize that that's not to be. The speed with which you can come to a conclusion about staying wide awake, ready and perceptive as to what's next. What is the next right thing to be doing? And so the Vedic meditator has that advantage because their deep inner consciousness has gone to that quiet place so many times, the body has been rid of unnecessary stress reactive chemistry. Now their body's been filled up with stay and play chemistry. I refer to stay and play because for me, it's the statement that's the opposite of fight or flee. And, stress reactivity is called by scientists fight/fight, fight/flight chemistry, readiness to fight for your life or run for your life, which sounds a little exaggerated, but in fact, studies have shown that people can have fight-flight reactive chemistry in their body under the slightest provocation and not always negative. There was a researcher at UCLA in the 1970s who selected 14 young teenage men, about 15 years of age or so, from two distinct socioeconomic groups, one which you could broadly refer to as the haves, the members of those families, the privileged ones, and those who were from the have-nots, from the less privileged suburbs of Los Angeles. And he wanted to check and see what their socioeconomic upbringing impact had had on their stress levels. And there's a measure which we can use to do this called galvanic skin response. Galvanic skin response sounds very fancy, but it means how much little beads of sweat can be detected on the palm of the hand when you are slightly anxious. And it's the basis of the lie detector test. And in case you ever wonder how sensitive this is, one of my professors once said to me, I'm going to put a GSR, galvanic skin response, on your hand. It was like a silver silver chloride electrode here and another one there. And there's a battery, a direct current battery that just runs a current across your palm. You can't feel it any more than you could feel a battery sitting in your hand. But the sensitivity of the microscopic beads of sweat going from A to B, if there's a lot of skin conductivity, there's a lot of sweat. If there is skin resistance, then you have a relatively dry palm. And so then you can be fed a stimulus of some kind and see. And the professor put it on me and he said, all right, let's just play a game. I'm drawing a line with my toe on the carpet. So there was kind of a line in the carpet he made with his shoe. He said, stand up and toe the line. And he goes, all right, that's 1,000-foot cliff. It's 1,000 feet down to a roaring river and certain death, and wind is blowing up in your face. Now go ahead and put your toes over the line. And he said it in a kind of silly way. And he said, watch what happens on the machine. There's a part of your brain that believes what I just told you. And sure enough, you could see the sweat levels on the hand gradually increasing, just in case it was true, just in case. Or just the faintest thought that a thing like that could happen. Whereas if you have quite a strong emotion response, you really get a lot of sweat on your hand. You may not be able to feel it, but that device can measure it. And then it really shows you have, skin conductivity equals anxiety. So in this research study, these 14 boys were all wired up with GSR. And the professor, the researcher, went into another room, the control room, to adjust his things and left them watching a television that was mounted up near the ceiling in the kind of waiting room. And while he was adjusting his machinery, he began to hear a buzzer on his galvanic skin response meter indicating that dangerous levels of stress activity were occurring in the boys who were wired in the other room. So he raced back in there thinking maybe they'd got into a fight or something, but no. These 14 boys were all watching the television and watching a TV commercial for the kind of car they all wanted. And they were having danger levels of stress reactivity in their galvanic skin response. And so this shows how, whether we know it or not, we're constantly capable of being triggered into stress reactivity even by pleasant experiences. Stress doesn't discriminate between unpleasant overloads or pleasant overloads. An overload is an overload. And so then, to what extent has that kind of reactivity accumulated chemically in the body? And when it has, we're no longer in charge of how we react. And so then someone who's stoic, who displays a stoic attitude, properly speaking, is someone whose state of consciousness is liberated from prefabricated stress reactivity. They're not required by the existing chemical condition of their body to go reactive. Consequently, they may be seen by others as being relaxed, settled, considerate. They hear some news, and they have a quiet, easygoing frame of mind where they're taking it in. They are gathering the information, and there is a quiet metabolizing of that and a digesting of what is the next right thing. But somebody else who's more reactive than that looks at that and goes, Oh, stoic. Very stoic. So Stoicism really is badly misunderstood in the world today as, someone who has cultured an attitude of this. When properly, it comes from a spontaneous shift in one's state of consciousness through meditation, and a concomitant shift in the style of functioning of the nervous system. And then one has, that kind of, in the Sanskrit we have another word, Vairagya. Vairagya, Vairagya. Vairagya in Sanskrit, it means not detachment. It's often translated that way, and that's an incorrect translation. Non-attachment. Detachment means, you made a conscious decision to detach yourself from the implications of circumstances. Non-attachment means you weren't attached in the first place. So non-attachment, that non-attached consciousness state that didn't get attached in the first place to, rigid attachment to specific timings, rigid attachment to specific outcomes, indicates not trusting or not knowing that in the larger picture, only evolution is happening. And so, when we have Vairagya, we have a willingness to gather the constantly updated news about the world, whatever's going on, the information about what's happening and what isn't happening, and to metabolize that and act accordingly, rather than, I'm not in charge of my reaction, I'm just being reactive based on some historic imprint that's been made in me that no longer is relevant.